Detective Ray Wilson had been solving cases for 15 years. He was the kind of man people trusted when they had nowhere else to turn. In the small town of Pine Valley, everyone knew Ray. He helped find missing pets, caught cheating spouses, and solved mysteries the police couldn't handle. Ray was 42 years old with graying hair and kind eyes. He lived in a modest house on Oak Street with his wife Lisa and their 16-year-old son Tom. Every morning, Ray would drink his coffee on the front porch, waving at neighbors as they walked their dogs or headed to work. His office was downtown, above the old bakery. The smell of fresh bread would drift up through the floorboards, making visitors feel at home. Ray's desk was always covered with case files, photographs, and notes written in his careful handwriting. He believed every case deserved his full attention, no matter how small. In March 2014, everything changed. A worried mother named Patricia came to Ray's office. Her daughter Kelly had vanished 3 weeks earlier. Kelly was 28 years old and worked as a bookkeeper at the town's main factory, Pine Valley Manufacturing. She lived alone in a small apartment near the river and had never disappeared before. Patricia sat across from Ray's desk, twisting a tissue in her hands. "The police say there's nothing more they can do," she said, her voice shaking. "They think Kelly just left town, on her own. But I know my daughter. She would never leave without telling me." Ray listened carefully as Patricia explained the situation. Kelly had been acting strange in the weeks before she disappeared. She seemed worried about something at work but wouldn't talk about it. She had been working late nights and coming home tired and anxious. "Did she mention any problems with her job?" Ray asked, taking notes in his small notebook. Patricia nodded. She said something about numbers not adding up right. Kelly was always good with numbers, even as a little girl. If she said something was wrong, then something was definitely wrong. Ray took the case immediately. Something about Patricia's story bothered him. In his experience, when good people suddenly became worried about their work, it usually meant they had discovered something they weren't supposed to see. Ray began his investigation the next day. He visited Kelly's apartment, which the police had already searched. Everything looked normal. No signs of a struggle, no missing clothes or belongings. But Ray noticed details the police had missed. Kelly's computer was gone, even though her laptop bag was still in the closet. Her work files were missing from her home office. He spoke to Kelly's neighbors, co-workers, and friends. Most people described Kelly as quiet and hardworking. She didn't have a boyfriend and rarely went out at night. But her best friend Amy told Ray something interesting. "Kelly called me 2 weeks before she disappeared," Amy said. "She sounded scared. She said she had found something at work that could get her in trouble. I asked her to tell me more, but she said it was too dangerous to talk about on the phone." Ray's investigation led him to Pine Valley Manufacturing. The factory had been the town's main employer for 30 years. It made paper products and employed over 200 people. The owner, a man named Frank Torres, was well respected in the community. He donated money to local schools and sponsored the high school basketball team. Ray requested a meeting with Frank Torres, claiming he was investigating Kelly's disappearance. Frank was helpful and concerned. He said Kelly had been a good employee, who always arrived on time and did quality work. "I can't imagine why she would just leave," Frank said, sitting behind his large desk. "We were actually planning to promote her to senior bookkeeper next month." But when Ray asked to see Kelly's work area and files, Frank became uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but those files contain confidential business information. I can't let an outsider look at them without a court order." Ray found this response suspicious. In his experience, innocent people were usually eager to help with missing person cases, especially when it involved their own employees. Ray decided to investigate the factory more carefully. He drove past the building several times, noting the security cameras and guard schedules. The factory was located on the edge of town, surrounded by empty fields and old warehouses. Some of these warehouses had been abandoned for years. One evening, Ray parked his car near the old Riverside Mill, about a mile from the main factory. This building had been empty for over 10 years, but Ray noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt road leading to it. Someone had been using this abandoned place recently. Ray began spending his evenings watching the area. He used binoculars from his car hidden behind a line of trees. For 3 nights, he saw nothing unusual. But on the 4th night, he observed something strange. 2 expensive cars arrived at the abandoned mill around midnight. Several men in business suits got out and went inside. They stayed for about an hour, then left separately. Ray recognized one of the men as Frank Torres. Another man looked familiar, but Ray couldn't place where he had seen him before. Ray returned the next night with a camera. He managed to take several photographs of the men and their license plates. When he developed the photos, he was shocked to discover that one of the men was Mayor Robert Kellerman. Ray had known the mayor for years and had even voted for him in the last election. The more Ray investigated, the more worried he became. He discovered that several other people had gone missing from Pine Valley over the past 5 years. The police reports described these cases as people who had simply moved away or run off. But Ray found connections between all of them. They had all worked at businesses owned by Frank Torres or his associates. Ray realized he was investigating something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple missing person case. He began to suspect that Kelly had discovered some kind of illegal activity at the factory, and that her disappearance was connected to the secret meetings at the abandoned mill. Ray knew he needed to be careful. If powerful people like the mayor were involved, he couldn't trust the local police. He decided to contact the FBI, but first he wanted to gather more evidence. On March 14th, Ray made a difficult decision. He wrote a letter to his son Tom, explaining what he had discovered and what he planned to do. He hid the letter in a secret place in his home office, hoping Tom would never need to find it. The next evening, March 15th, Ray received a phone call from an unknown person. The caller claimed to have information about Kelly and agreed to meet Ray at the abandoned mill. Ray suspected it might be a trap, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that someone might have real information about Kelly's whereabouts. Before leaving his house, Ray called his son Tom, who was studying at a friend's house. "I'm following up on an important lead tonight," Ray told him. "I should be home by midnight. If I'm not back by morning, call the state police, not the local ones. Tell them everything I've told you about the Kelly case." Tom was used to his father working late on cases, so he didn't think much of the call. "Be careful, Dad," he said. "I'll see you tomorrow." Ray drove to the abandoned mill as darkness fell. He parked his car in the usual spot and approached the building cautiously. The place was eerily quiet, with broken windows staring down like empty eyes. Ray had been here before during his surveillance, but tonight felt different. Ray waited outside for 20 minutes, but no one appeared. He decided to look inside the building, thinking his contact might be waiting there. The old mill was a maze of empty rooms and rusty machinery. Ray used his flashlight to navigate through the debris and shadows. As Ray explored the building, he found evidence that people had been meeting there regularly. There were folding chairs arranged in a circle, recent cigarette butts, and papers with numbers and dates written on them. Ray photographed everything with his small camera. Suddenly, Ray heard voices outside. He quickly turned off his flashlight and moved to a window. 3 men were approaching the building. Ray recognized Frank Torres and Mayor Kellerman. The third man was someone Ray had never seen before, a large man in a dark suit who walked like he was used to violence. Ray realized he had walked into a trap. The phone call had been designed to lure him to this isolated location. He needed to escape, but the men were blocking the main entrance. Ray looked for another way out, his heart pounding in his chest. Ray found a back door that led to the riverside of the building. He managed to slip outside without being seen, but his car was parked on the other side of the building, near where the men had entered. He was trapped. Ray made a desperate decision. He hid his investigation notes and camera in a waterproof container and buried it near a distinctive tree by the river. If something happened to him, maybe someone would find the evidence someday. As Ray tried to circle around to reach his car, the men spotted him. "There he is!" one of them shouted. Ray ran toward his car, but he wasn't fast enough. The large man in the suit caught up with him in the parking area. "Detective Wilson," Mayor Kellerman said, approaching with Frank Torres. "You've been asking too many questions about things that don't concern you." Ray's car was found 2 days later by a jogger. The keys were still in the ignition, and Ray's case files were scattered in the back seat. There was no sign of Ray himself. The local police conducted a search of the area but found nothing. Ray's disappearance created a mystery that would haunt Pine Valley for years to come. His wife Lisa was devastated, and his son Tom struggled to understand how his father could simply vanish without a trace. The official investigation concluded that Ray had probably had an accident or decided to leave town, but those who knew him best never believed these explanations. The Kelly case was quietly closed, with officials claiming she had likely left town voluntarily. No other missing person cases were actively investigated. Life in Pine Valley returned to normal, at least on the surface. But the truth about what happened to Detective Ray Wilson remained buried, waiting for someone brave enough to dig it up. 10 years had passed since Detective Ray Wilson disappeared without a trace. His son Tom was now 26 years old, working as a freelance writer for newspapers and magazines. The young boy who once waited for his father to come home had grown into a man. But the questions about that night in March 2014 never left his mind. Tom's mother Lisa had tried her best to keep their family together after Ray vanished. She worked double shifts at the local hospital as a nurse, struggling to pay the mortgage and keep food on the table. The insurance company had refused to pay Ray's life insurance policy because there was no proof he was actually dead. Without his body or clear evidence of what happened, they were stuck in a terrible waiting game. Over the years, Lisa had aged beyond her years. The stress of not knowing what happened to her husband, combined with financial worries, had taken its toll. Her once bright smile appeared less often, and her eyes carried a sadness that never quite went away. She still kept Ray's coffee cup in the kitchen cabinet and his clothes in their bedroom closet, unable to accept that he might never come home. Tom had moved to the city after high school, partly to pursue his career in journalism, but mostly to escape the constant reminders of his missing father. Every street corner in Pine Valley held memories: the bakery below his father's old office, the park where they used to play catch, the diner where Ray would take him for pancakes on Saturday mornings. But financial reality had finally caught up with the Wilson family. Lisa could no longer afford the mortgage payments on their Oak Street house. The medical bills from a minor heart attack she'd suffered the previous year had drained their savings. With heavy hearts, they decided it was time to sell the family home and find Lisa a smaller, more affordable place to live. Tom returned to Pine Valley on a cold Saturday morning in March 2024, exactly 10 years after his father's disappearance. The timing wasn't planned, but it felt meaningful somehow. As he drove down familiar streets, Tom noticed how much the town had changed. Several local businesses had closed, replaced by chain stores. The old movie theater where he'd gone on his first date was now a parking lot. The house on Oak Street looked smaller than Tom remembered. The white paint was peeling, and the front porch where his father used to drink coffee sagged slightly. Lisa met him at the door with a tired smile and a hug that lasted longer than usual. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly. "I wasn't sure I could do this alone." They spent the morning going through closets and bedrooms, deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. Each item seemed to carry a memory. Tom found his old baseball glove, report cards his father had proudly saved, and family photos from happier times. The hardest part was dealing with Ray's belongings. Lisa had barely touched his things in 10 years. His clothes still hung in the closet. His reading glasses sat on the nightstand, and his wallet remained in the top drawer of his dresser, still containing $43 and a picture of his family. "I keep thinking he might come back and wonder where everything went," Lisa admitted as they stood in the bedroom doorway. Tom understood his mother's feelings, but he also knew they needed to move forward. "Mom, Dad wouldn't want us to live like this forever. He'd want us to be happy and secure." They decided to tackle Ray's home office last. This small room in the basement had been his private space, where he worked on cases and kept his files. Lisa rarely went down there even when Ray was alive, respecting his need for a quiet workspace. The office looked exactly as Ray had left it 10 years ago. His desk was covered with papers, his filing cabinets were stuffed with old case files, and his coffee cup still sat next to his computer keyboard, now filled with dust instead of coffee. A thin layer of dust covered everything, like a blanket of time that had settled over their lives. Tom began sorting through the desk drawers while Lisa packed books from the shelves. Most of the papers were old cases: insurance fraud investigations, background checks for local businesses, and missing pet reports. Tom smiled as he read some of the simpler cases his father had solved. Ray had truly cared about helping people, no matter how small their problems seemed. As Tom worked, he noticed that one corner of the room felt different when he walked on it. The floor seemed to give slightly under his weight, as if the floorboards weren't properly secured. He knelt down and examined the area more closely. "Mom, do you remember Dad ever mentioning problems with the floor down here?" Tom called upstairs. "No. Why?" Lisa replied, her voice echoing down the basement stairs. Tom ran his hands along the floorboards near the corner. One board was definitely loose. He could feel it move when he pressed on it. Using a screwdriver from Ray's desk drawer, Tom carefully pried up the loose board. Underneath, Tom discovered a small space that had been deliberately hollowed out. Inside this hidden compartment was a waterproof plastic container, the kind used by hikers and campers. Tom's heart began beating faster as he lifted the container out of its hiding place. "Mom, you need to come down here," Tom called, his voice shaking slightly. Lisa hurried down the stairs, her face concerned. "What is it, honey?" Tom showed her the container. "Dad hid this under the floorboards. I don't think this is something he would have done unless it was really important." With trembling hands, Tom opened the container. Inside was a single envelope with his name written on it in his father's familiar handwriting. The date on the envelope was March 14th, 2014, just one day before Ray disappeared. Lisa gasped and sat down heavily in Ray's desk chair. "He knew," she whispered. Somehow he knew something was going to happen. Tom carefully opened the envelope and unfolded several pages of his father's neat handwriting. As he began to read, his face grew pale. The letter started with words that sent chills down his spine. "My dear son Tom, if you are reading this letter, then something has happened to me, and the people I was investigating have probably succeeded in stopping me from exposing the truth." Tom continued reading, his voice getting stronger as he shared the letter with his mother. "The Kelly Johnson case that I was working on is not what it appeared to be. Kelly didn't just disappear because she wanted to leave town. She discovered something at Pine Valley Manufacturing that put her life in danger, and I believe the same thing has now happened to me." The letter went on to explain Ray's investigation in detail. He had discovered that the factory was being used as a front for illegal activities. Kelly had found evidence that money was being moved through fake company accounts, and that several people who had tried to ask questions about these activities had mysteriously disappeared over the years. "I have proof that Mayor Kellerman and factory owner Frank Torres are involved in something much bigger than simple business fraud," the letter continued. "They have been meeting secretly at the old Riverside Mill, and I believe they are part of a network that extends beyond our small town." Tom's hands were shaking as he read the most shocking part of the letter. "I have discovered evidence of people being transported through our area, people who don't want to be moved. The abandoned warehouses near the factory are being used as temporary holding places. Kelly found records showing payments for transportation services that don't match any legitimate shipping activities." Lisa covered her mouth in horror. "Your father was investigating human trafficking in our little town?" The letter included specific names of people Ray suspected were involved, including several local business owners and even some police officers. He had documented license plate numbers, meeting times, and financial records that Kelly had shared with him before she disappeared. "I'm going to meet with someone tonight who claims to have more information about Kelly's whereabouts," Ray had written. "If something happens to me, take this evidence to FBI agent Catherine Rivers in Pittsburgh. She specializes in this type of crime, and I believe she can be trusted. Do not go to the local police. I have reason to believe some of them are compromised." The letter ended with coordinates, a specific location in the nearby Allegheny National Forest. "If you need more evidence, check these coordinates. I have hidden additional materials there as backup in case something happens to the evidence I'm carrying with me." Tom and his mother sat in stunned silence for several minutes after finishing the letter. The father and husband they had lost wasn't just a missing person. He had been a hero trying to expose a criminal network that was harming innocent people. "We have to do something with this information," Tom said finally. "Dad died trying to stop these people. We can't just ignore what he discovered." Lisa was scared. "Tom, if these people were willing to make your father disappear, what do you think they'll do to us if they find out we have this letter?" It was a valid concern. 10 years had passed, but some of the people named in Ray's letter might still be active. Tom realized that pursuing this investigation could put both him and his mother in danger. "Maybe we should just take the letter to the FBI and let them handle it," Lisa suggested. Tom considered this option, but his journalist instincts were telling him there was more to discover. The coordinates his father had provided were calling to him. What if there was additional evidence hidden in the forest that could help solve not just his father's disappearance, but also help other families find answers about their missing loved ones? "I need to check those coordinates first," Tom decided. If Dad risked his life to hide evidence there, it must be important. Lisa was torn between supporting her son and protecting him from the same fate that had befallen her husband. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said. "I can't lose you too." Tom spent the rest of the day researching the people mentioned in his father's letter. Some had died in the intervening years. Mayor Kellerman had drowned in a boating accident in 2019, and one of the business owners had died in a car crash. But Frank Torres was still alive and still running Pine Valley Manufacturing. As Tom prepared to follow his father's final clues, he felt a mixture of excitement and fear. After 10 years of wondering what had happened to Ray Wilson, the truth was finally within reach. But Tom was also aware that pursuing this truth might lead him down the same dangerous path that had cost his father his life. The hidden letter had changed everything. What started as a simple house cleaning project had become the beginning of a quest for justice that was 10 years overdue. Tom Wilson spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about his father's letter. The words kept running through his mind like a song he couldn't stop hearing. His father had been investigating something dangerous, something that had cost him his life. Now Tom had to decide whether to follow the same path or let the truth stay buried forever. His mother Lisa was worried sick. She had already lost her husband to this mystery, and the thought of losing her son too was almost too much to bear. They had long conversations at the kitchen table, the same table where Ray used to eat breakfast before heading to his office each morning. "Maybe we should just give the letter to the police and let them handle it," Lisa said for the 10th time. Tom shook his head. Dad specifically said not to trust the local police. Some of them might be involved in whatever he was investigating. Then what about the FBI agent he mentioned, Catherine Rivers? Tom had already looked her up online. Agent Rivers had transferred from Pittsburgh to Seattle in 2018, but she was still working for the FBI. Her specialty was organized crime and human trafficking cases. If anyone would understand the importance of Ray's evidence, it would be her. But first, Tom wanted to check the coordinates his father had written in the letter. The location was in Allegheny National Forest, about 2 hours from Pine Valley. Tom had hiked in that area as a teenager with his father. Ray had taught him how to read a compass and navigate through the woods using landmarks. On a cloudy Thursday morning, Tom loaded his backpack with supplies and told his mother he was going for a hike. He didn't want to worry her by explaining exactly where he was going or what he hoped to find. The drive to the forest brought back memories of family camping trips. Ray had loved the outdoors and had taught Tom to appreciate the peace and quiet of nature. As Tom parked his car at the Yastui trailhead, he wondered if his father had stood in this same spot 10 years ago, hiding evidence that might finally bring justice. Using his father's coordinates and a GPS device on his phone, Tom hiked deep into the forest. The location was several miles from the main trail, in an area that few people ever visited. Tom had to push through thick undergrowth and climb over fallen trees to reach the exact spot. When he arrived at the coordinates, Tom found himself in a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. At first, nothing looked unusual. But as he searched more carefully, he noticed something that made his heart race. There was a large rock formation that looked natural, but one of the rocks had been moved recently. The dirt around it was different from the surrounding soil. Tom used a folding shovel from his backpack to carefully dig around the rock. After about an hour of work, he discovered a metal box buried about 3 feet underground. The box was wrapped in plastic bags to keep moisture out, just like the container he had found under his father's office floor. Inside the box, Tom found photographs, documents, and a small digital camera. His hands were shaking as he looked through the materials. The photographs showed people entering and leaving the abandoned mill at night. Some faces were clear enough to identify, including Frank Torres and the late Mayor Kellerman. But the most shocking discovery was a folder containing copies of financial records. These documents showed large payments being made to various people and businesses with codes and abbreviations that Tom didn't understand. The amounts were huge, tens of thousands of dollars being moved around in ways that didn't make sense for legitimate business activities. The digital camera contained additional photos and even some video footage. Tom's father had been very thorough in documenting his investigation. There were shots of license plates, faces, and meetings. One video showed several people unloading something from a truck at the abandoned mill, working quickly and nervously, as if they were afraid of being caught. Tom realized he was looking at evidence of the criminal network his father had been investigating. This wasn't just about Kelly Johnson anymore. This was proof of a much larger operation that had been running for years, possibly involving dozens of people and countless victims. The weight of this discovery hit Tom like a physical blow. His father hadn't just stumbled onto a small-town crime. Ray Wilson had uncovered something that reached far beyond Pine Valley, something that powerful people would kill to keep secret. Tom carefully packed everything back into the waterproof box and hiked back to his car. He drove home in a daze, his mind spinning with questions and possibilities. When he arrived at his mother's house, Lisa took one look at his face and knew he had found something important. "What did you discover?" she asked quietly. Tom showed her the contents of the box, explaining each piece of evidence. Lisa grew pale as she realized the scope of what Ray had been investigating. "Your father was trying to save people," she whispered, looking at the photographs. "He died trying to help strangers he'd never even met." That evening, Tom made a decision that would change his life forever. He called the FBI office in Seattle and asked to speak with Agent Catherine Rivers. After explaining who he was and why he was calling, he was surprised when she agreed to meet with him immediately. "I've been waiting for this call for 10 years, Agent Rivers said over the phone. "Your father contacted me just days before he disappeared. He said he had evidence of a trafficking network, but he vanished before we could meet." Agent Rivers flew to Pittsburgh the next day, and Tom drove there to meet her. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. When Tom showed her the evidence from the forest, her expression grew very serious. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, studying the photographs and documents. "Your father was right. This is part of a much larger network that we've been investigating for years." Agent Rivers explained that the FBI had been tracking similar operations across several states. The network used legitimate businesses as fronts, moving people and money through a complex system that was hard to detect and even harder to prove. "The problem is that these people are very good at covering their tracks," she said. "They eliminate witnesses, destroy evidence, and corrupt local officials. Your father got too close to the truth, and they stopped him before he could expose them." Tom felt a mixture of pride and sadness. His father had been a hero, but he had paid the ultimate price for his courage. Agent Rivers continued her explanation. "What your father discovered matches intelligence we've gathered from other sources, but we've never had this level of detail before. These photos and financial records could be the key to bringing down the entire network." Over the next several hours, Agent Rivers walked Tom through the evidence, explaining what each piece meant. The coded financial records showed payments to trucking companies, security firms, and various businesses that were all connected to the trafficking operation. The photographs provided faces and license plates that could be traced. "There's something else you need to know," Agent Rivers said carefully. "Several of the people your father identified have died in the past 10 years. Car accidents, heart attacks, house fires. At the time, these deaths seemed unrelated. But now I think someone has been systematically eliminating anyone who might have known about their operation." This revelation sent chills down Tom's spine. The people who had made his father disappear were still out there, still dangerous, and still covering their tracks. "What happens now?" Tom asked. "We need to be very careful," Agent Rivers replied. "If these people realize that you have this evidence, you and your mother could be in serious danger. We need to develop a plan that will expose them without putting you at risk." Agent Rivers proposed a strategy that would use Tom as bait, but in a controlled way. They would let certain people know that Tom had discovered something about his father's disappearance, then watch to see who responded. The FBI would be monitoring everything, ready to step in if anything went wrong. "It's dangerous," she admitted. "But it might be the only way to draw them out and get the proof we need to arrest them." Tom thought about his mother, about his father's sacrifice, and about all the people who had been harmed by this criminal network. He knew what his father would want him to do. "I'll do it," Tom said. "But I want to make sure my mother is protected." Agent Rivers nodded. "We'll put her in a safe location until this is over. And Tom, I want you to know that your father would be proud of what you're doing." Over the next week, Agent Rivers and her team developed a detailed plan. They would use Tom's background as a journalist to create a believable story about him. Investigating his father's disappearance for a magazine article, they would leak information in strategic ways, making it seem like Tom was getting close to the truth. The plan was risky, but it was also the best chance they had to bring justice to the people responsible for Ray Wilson's death and the disappearance of so many others. As Tom prepared for what might be the most dangerous thing he had ever done, he thought about his father's words from the letter. "Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight is dangerous." Ray Wilson had died fighting for justice. Now it was his son's turn to continue that fight, armed with the evidence his father had died to protect, and the determination to see justice served at last. The truth about what happened in Pine Valley 10 years ago was finally going to come to light, no matter what the cost. The plan was set in motion on a cold Monday morning in April. Tom Wilson sat in a coffee shop in downtown Pine Valley, his laptop open in front of him, pretending to work on an article about his father's disappearance. Agent Catherine Rivers and her team were positioned around the town, some in unmarked cars, others disguised as tourists and shoppers. Tom's mother, Lisa, was safely staying with her sister in another state, far away from whatever was about to happen in Pine Valley. She had been reluctant to leave, but Tom had convinced her it was the only way to keep her safe. The first part of their plan was simple, but risky. Tom had posted on social media that he was back in Pine Valley, researching his father's old cases for a magazine article. He mentioned that he had found some interesting information and was planning to interview people who had known his father. Within hours, Tom's phone started ringing. Old family friends called to offer their support and share memories of Ray Wilson. But there were also calls that felt different. People asking specific questions about what Tom had discovered, what he was planning to write, and whether he had found any of his father's old files. Agent Rivers had given Tom a small recording device and taught him how to handle these conversations. Every call was being monitored by the FBI team. On Tuesday, Tom visited the Pine Valley manufacturing plant, the same factory where Kelly Johnson had worked before she disappeared. He asked to speak with Frank Torres, claiming he was writing an article about how his father's disappearance had affected local businesses. Frank Torres was now in his 60s, with gray hair and worried eyes. He seemed nervous when Tom introduced himself, but agreed to answer a few questions. "Your father was a good man," Frank said, sitting behind his desk in the same office where Ray had met with him 10 years earlier. "It was terrible what happened to him." Tom asked careful questions about Kelly Johnson and the investigation his father had been conducting. Frank's answers were polite but guarded. He claimed to remember very little about Kelly or about Ray's visits to the factory, but Tom noticed something interesting. Frank kept checking his phone during their conversation, and he seemed eager to end the meeting quickly. As Tom left the factory, he saw Frank making a phone call through his office window. Agent Rivers confirmed that Frank had indeed made several calls immediately after Tom's visit. The FBI team was tracking all communications in the area, waiting to see who might be coordinating a response to Tom's activities. On Wednesday evening, Tom received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar and slightly threatening. "You should stop asking questions about things that don't concern you," the caller said. "Your father learned that lesson the hard way." Tom's heart was pounding, but he tried to sound calm. "I'm just writing an article about missing persons cases. I'm not trying to cause trouble for anyone." "Some stories are better left untold," the caller replied. "If you're smart, you'll leave town and forget about whatever you think you've discovered." The call ended abruptly. Agent Rivers later confirmed that the call had come from a prepaid phone that couldn't be traced, but the FBI team had recorded every word. Tom was beginning to understand the fear his father must have felt in his final days. These people were watching, listening, and making it clear that they would not hesitate to harm anyone who threatened their operation. On Thursday, Tom decided to visit the abandoned Riverside Mill, the same place where his father had disappeared 10 years earlier. Agent Rivers had initially opposed this idea, considering it too dangerous, but Tom argued that it might provoke the response they needed to catch the criminals. The old mill looked exactly as Tom remembered it from his childhood, when he and his friends had dared each other to explore the scary abandoned building. Broken windows stared down like empty eyes, and weeds grew through cracks in the concrete. But Tom now knew this place held dark secrets. As Tom walked around the building, taking photos and notes, he felt like he was being watched. Agent Rivers had assured him that FBI agents were positioned around the area, but Tom still felt vulnerable and alone. Inside the mill, Tom found the room where his father had discovered evidence of the secret meetings. Folding chairs were still stacked in a corner covered with dust and rust. Tom wondered how many criminal plans had been discussed in this very room. Tom spent about an hour exploring the building, then returned to his car. As he drove away, he noticed a black SUV following him. The vehicle stayed behind him for several miles before turning off onto a side road. That evening, Tom received another phone call, this time from someone claiming to have information about his father's disappearance. "Meet me at the mill tomorrow night at midnight," the caller said. "Come alone and I'll tell you what really happened to Ray Wilson." Tom recognized the setup immediately. This was exactly what had happened to his father 10 years earlier. Someone had lured Ray to the mill with a promise of information, and he had never returned. Agent Rivers and her team spent Friday preparing for what they expected would be the final confrontation. They positioned agents throughout the area around the mill, set up surveillance equipment, and made sure Tom was wearing both a tracking device and a hidden camera. "Remember," Agent Rivers told Tom, "your job is to get them talking. If they reveal information about your father's death or about their criminal activities, we'll have what we need to arrest them. But if things go wrong, don't try to be a hero. Just get out of there safely." Tom understood the risks, but he also knew this might be his only chance to learn the truth about what had happened to his father. Saturday night arrived with a cold, rain falling on Pine Valley. Tom drove to the mill at 11:45 p.m., his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He parked in the same spot where his father's car had been found 10 years earlier. The mill was dark and silent. Tom waited in his car for several minutes, then walked slowly toward the building. The FBI team was out there somewhere in the darkness, but Tom felt completely alone. As Tom approached the entrance, 3 men stepped out of the shadows. Tom recognized Frank Torres immediately. The other 2 men were strangers. One was elderly and well-dressed. The other was younger and looked like he was used to violence. "Tom Wilson," Frank said, his voice different from their meeting earlier in the week. "You should have listened to our warnings." The elderly man stepped forward. "Your father was a stubborn man who couldn't leave well enough alone. He discovered things that were none of his business." Tom tried to stay calm, remembering that everything was being recorded. "What things? What did my father discover?" "He found out about our business arrangements," the man continued. "We've been moving certain products through this area for many years. Your father threatened to expose our operations." Tom realized this was a confession. These men were admitting to criminal activities, and the FBI was recording every word. "What happened to Kelly Johnson?" Tom asked. Frank Torres answered this time. "Kelly found some financial records she wasn't supposed to see. She started asking questions just like your father did later. Where is she now? Tom pressed. The elderly man smiled coldly. Kelly is no longer a problem. Neither is your father, and soon, neither will you be. The younger man stepped closer to Tom, and Tom could see that he was carrying a weapon. This was the moment Agent Rivers had warned him about. The conversation had gone as far as it could safely go. Suddenly, bright lights illuminated the area around the mill. FBI agents emerged from their hiding places, surrounding the three men with weapons drawn. FBI, put your hands up, Agent Rivers shouted, her gun pointed at the elderly man. The confrontation that followed was brief but intense. Frank Torres immediately surrendered, raising his hands and backing away from Tom. The elderly man tried to run, but was quickly tackled by two agents. The younger man dropped his weapon and surrendered without resistance. As the arrests were being made, Agent Rivers approached Tom. Are you okay? She asked. Tom nodded, though his hands were still shaking. Did you get what you needed? We got everything, she replied with satisfaction. They confessed to multiple crimes, including your father's death. Over the next several hours, the full scope of the criminal network was revealed. The elderly man was revealed to be a regional coordinator for a trafficking operation that spanned several states. Frank Torres had been providing the local infrastructure, using his factory and the abandoned mill as staging areas. During questioning, Frank Torres finally revealed what had happened to Ray Wilson. Tom's father had been brought to the mill that night in March 2014, just as Tom had been. When Ray refused to stop his investigation, they had killed him and buried his body in a concrete foundation that was being poured for a new warehouse. Next morning, ground-penetrating radar equipment was brought to the site Frank had described. By afternoon, they had located Ray Wilson's remains. After 10 years of not knowing, Tom finally had his father back. The arrests led to a much larger investigation that uncovered the entire trafficking network. Over the next 6 months, more than 30 people were arrested across 5 states. The operation that had been running for over a decade was finally shut down. Kelly Johnson's remains were also found, buried in the same area where Ray had been hidden. Her family finally had answers about what had happened to their daughter. Tom wrote the magazine article he had promised, but it became much more than that. His story about uncovering his father's investigation became a book, then a documentary that brought national attention to human trafficking in rural America. The Pine Valley manufacturing plant was closed permanently, and the abandoned mill was demolished. A small memorial park was built on the site, dedicated to Ray Wilson and the other victims of the criminal network he had died trying to expose. Tom's mother, Lisa, returned to Pine Valley for Ray's funeral, which was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched during his years as a private investigator. Lisa finally had closure about her husband's disappearance, though the pain of losing him would never fully go away. 6 months after the arrests, Tom stood at his father's graveside, finally able to tell Ray that justice had been served. He placed a copy of the newspaper article announcing the convictions on the headstone, along with his father's old detective badge, which had been recovered from the mill site. You did it, Dad, Tom said quietly. You stopped them, even after they thought they had won. Tom established the Ray Wilson Foundation to help families dealing with missing person cases and to support ethical private investigation work. His father's sacrifice had not been in vain. It had led to justice for many victims and prevented countless others from being harmed. The truth about what happened in Pine Valley had finally come to light, just as Ray Wilson had hoped it would when he wrote that letter to his son 10 years earlier.